And I said, ma'am, uh, every part of what you just said is wrong and impossible. In 2006, when I was in college at Georgia Tech, I started an exotic car rental company. This was when you could get stated income loans for exotic cars, so I could say what I thought I was going to make in renting it out. And I got a loan for a Lamborghini at 20 years old. It was a 2004 Giallo Midas, pearl yellow Lamborghini Gallardo. Over the next few months, and I'd add more cars and get more loans, and I had a couple Ferraris and things like that. But in 2009, a few years into the life of this business, I was going to get married. I'd actually started dating my wife a week after I incorporated the rental car company, so she was well aware of the cars and the drama that tended to come with them. And at this time, it was still an extremely small company. I was the only real employee. I would sometimes get help from mechanically minded friends or people who would give me rides after I'd drop a car off. This was before the days of Uber and things like that, and you certainly weren't going to use an Atlanta-based taxi cab. And so I was really just hustling in every way that I possibly could to get the cars out as many days as I could to get them rented. And so I had a few really good customers that would come back periodically. And the best kinds of rental car customers are the ones that pretend they own the cars because they take really good care of them. And so I would call that like ownership replacement. And keep in mind, this is 08, 09. This is when the US economy is falling apart. Depreciation in luxury assets is rampant. So my inventory is going down in value, but the demand for rentals as an alternative to owning the cars and paying the maintenance and the insurance and the depreciation and everything yourself was a really, really attractive thing. I had a customer who was previously an Atlanta police officer. He was retired or on disability or something like that, but he'd rented my cars several times and he'd been great to them. Maybe they'd come back smelling a little bad from things he'd done in them, but at the end of the day, it was all right. And so he was a good customer and he paid well. He was going to rent the Gallardo around the time that I was going to be getting married. And of course, I didn't have anybody to take care of the business while I'm gone on my honeymoon. And so I said, look, the cars have to be back in by Wednesday before I get married on Saturday, because I had my bachelor party and things like that to happen in those days going up, and I just really didn't want the hassle. And the last thing I wanted was to not know where the cars were while I'm getting married. The foreshadowing phrase there. Well, he was actually going to have a friend in town. So in addition to renting my Gallardo, he rented my Ferrari 612 Scaglietti. And they're driving him around. I think he probably picked him up on a Friday, the Friday before the rehearsal. And so he's driving around, and they actually end up extending the rental. They come back and they pay me in cash. Previously, I'd verified his insurance and he'd paid on a credit card. The way most of the rentals would happen, there's contracts in place. Everything's the way it's supposed to be. Now, the problem with the exotic car rental business is generally the insurance, because you've got to have the right commercial insurance in place, but you can't use it because if you ever file a claim, you can't renew it. That creates a very difficult situation that you're not that protected against things like theft. And I've told a whole lot of stories from this very chair about what happens to exotic car rental companies when people don't bring the cars back. That's the one thing that you really cannot have protection from. And we've helped people to recover these stolen cars and things like that, because when somebody doesn't return something that they have rented and it's a car, it's not a normal Grand Theft Auto situation. It is theft by conversion. I was telling him as he was renting these cars that they had to be back on Wednesday. And that's all going well until Tuesday, and he stops answering the phone. And now I've got multiple tracking systems on these cars. They've got internal batteries, they're hidden, things like that. I know where the cars are, and so I go to find where is the Gallardo. Tuesday night, I go to its location. It's in a body shop in Midtown Atlanta, and the whole nose is off the car. He had dropped it off thinking they were going to somehow fix a totally destroyed front bumper in time for him to get it back to me the next day. Well, he's not answering his phone, but I bring my tow truck driver down there. I tell him take it to the body shop that I use. It was not the first time or the fourth that car was going to be repainted on its front, so not that big of a deal. But for some reason, at that point, the 612's transponder was not reporting. And I saw where it was last, and of course I'm calling him about every 30 minutes trying to find out where it is. I get nothing. The next day, we're looking all over. And at the time, now prominent automotive YouTuber Doug DeMuro was not an automotive YouTuber. He was working for Porsche here in Atlanta at their headquarters. And he had a website that he ran in his spare time called Chasing Exotics. And it was a car spotting website where people would go around and they would take pictures of the cool cars that they saw. And because he was from Atlanta, I've known Doug since college, there were a lot of Atlanta-based spotters. So I saw some pictures of the car. It was popping up at different places, and The problem was I had already called the cops and said, hey, I kind of need y'all to be on the lookout for this car. And they had explained to me that, well, he's allowed to have it. You've extended his rental. It's not stolen. And I'm like, well, how do I make it stolen? Like, at what point? He's like, well, you've got to notify him by mail and do all these things. And so I literally spoke to cops on Wednesday, and they said, oh yeah, the car's right in front of us here at the valet at Lenox Mall. But I'm 30 minutes away with the spare key, and they're like, well, oh, they're coming to pick it up. It's driving away. And I'm like, stop them. They are not even the person that's on the rental contract. And so at that point, I knew this because it was a female in the car. I'm talking to my lawyers. I'm talking to everybody. I'm talking to friends that are out riding around. And, of course, this is Wednesday, getting into Thursday. Thursday night, I'm actually out at my bachelor party. And this is a pretty mild bachelor party. This is go race, go karts, have a nice dinner. I get a phone call. And I step away from the table because I'm ready to answer any phone call that there is. And I get a call and it says, it's a woman. And she says, my husband is the guy who bought your Ferrari yesterday from your employee, but we've decided that we really don't want it. So we want the BMW and the cash that we gave him for this car back. And I said, ma'am, every part of what you just said is wrong and impossible. So I need to understand what you think happened, and then I'll hopefully be able to fill in some of the gaps. And ultimately, you need to know that the car you have is stolen and I need to have it back. And she said, well, I'm a lawyer and possession is 9/10 of the law. And I said, well, that's not the way the law works. It's a rental car, so possession is literally 0/10 of the law. And, there's a lot of ways this can go, but ultimately I need you to get back. And she said, well, we need our stuff back. And so she had given a 2007 or 8 BMW 750 IL and $15,000 in cash. Or I should say, her husband had given it to my customer who was representing himself as someone in a position to sell this car. So I said, all right, well, this is massively problematic. I do not have an employee, much less that person as an employee. And so just this is how it's all going to go. And so they're out. They've hidden the car. They had disconnected the battery, effectively that it had been disconnected for long enough that the internal capacitance of the transponder had died. So it was in their garage. I knew generally where it was, but I couldn't break into their gated community and then into their garage to get my car back with my spare key. And periodically they would reconnect the battery and move the car. The next day, I finally get in touch with my customer, and he explains that he kind of thought I was going to be happy that he had sold the car because he had gotten them to agree to a very high selling price, even though he was going to self-finance it somehow. And I said, well, who is it? And he said, well, I don't have his, driver's license or his address or any of that information, but his name is Lucky. And so we're at a Waffle House where you have such meetings with people who have been dodging your phone calls for several days on the day after your bachelor party before you've got to race to the total other side of town to have your rehearsal. And I said, well, we have to get this car back. So he's talking and he's like, well, I've got the BMW, but I gave you the $15,000 for the rentals to extend them. I thought that's how this was all going to work. I was like, well, are you going to give him the BMW? And he's like, well, am I going to go to jail? And I'm like, we have to get the car back. But they would no longer agree to meet because they're worried about prosecution and things like that. And so literally it's back and forth. I'm going all over town, driving as fast as I can to get through all the different appointments and things like that. And they have stopped responding. We don't know where the car is. We're getting nowhere. The next day is my wedding day. And I had to tell my fiance that if my phone rings during the ceremony, I have to answer it. Because if we lose this car, not only do we go out of business because we have to file the insurance claim that'll never get paid, then we can't afford to pay the other ones, which are upside down because everything's upside down on the loans. I was like, this is irrecoverable. But we should still absolutely get married and enjoy a great life together. No, don't hear me as not saying that. But I mean, it's a bad day. Ultimately, we don't find it throughout the whole day Saturday. I remember almost nothing of my wedding because it was just such a blur of and of anxiety and concern and stress and everything. I would like to think that the customer that owed me these cars back was going to go out and get it, but he, of course, did not do anything. Ultimately, I have to leave on my honeymoon. And I don't know where the car is. I know where the Gallardo is. I know it'll be fixed eventually. I actually end up getting this guy's insurance to pay for the repairs to that. But in the meantime, I have to tell my lawyer, please do what you can to find this car because I'd really like to have it back. And it's going to be the worst thing in my life if I don't. Gone for a week to an island in the Caribbean where you can't check email or phones or anything like that. Just have to not know. and try to enjoy myself, and I managed to. But I got back and I finally got in touch with Lucky. And it took several days, but I just said, hey man, you've got a car that you know is stolen. You can't title it, register it, sell it, do anything, or you shouldn't be able to, despite what's happened in the last couple of weeks in our lives. And so I'm gonna need it back. Even though I had been paid a good bit of money for the rentals, I had massive expenses related to everything. And so he said, I need $5,000 to give you the car back. And I said, well, just so we're all on the same page, that is extortion for the return of stolen property that you know is stolen, that you know is mine, that you didn't acquire properly. So man, I need my $5,000. Now at the time, since I'd been paid in cash, I actually didn't have $5,000 in my checking account because it was that kind of business where there were a lot of months where you end with $10. And it's like, that's a win because it's not negative. And so I was talking to the cops and I said, hey, I got in touch with Lucky. He said he'll give me the car back for $5,000. And they're like, well, see if he'll take a check. And I said, are you saying that I should bounce that check? Because I feel compelled to remind you, Mr. Law Enforcement Officer, that it's a felony to bounce a check for $5,000. He said, yeah, don't worry about it. We're not going to come after you for it. So, great. Lucky was happy to take a check. He tells me the parking lot where they've now left the car. And of course, not only is the battery dead, but it's disconnected. So I meet him down there, call a tow truck driver, give him his check, sign it Mickey Mouse. And he actually says, you know what? You seem to know a lot about cars. Could you tell me something about my Maserati? And he brings out the ugliest looking Quattroporte painted like seafoam green so poorly by some back alley body shop that the paint is falling off in chunks. And he's like, what do I do? I said, well, I've got a great body shop. And we talked for long enough that he doesn't run off with this check that he's going to try to deposit and get mad about. We get the car towed back to my warehouse where I happened to live at the time. I was going to move in with my new wife the next week. We weren't supposed to live in this warehouse, but I'd converted a utility sink into a shower and another room, office into a bedroom. It was the best living ever. But no, living with my new wife was the best living ever. But warehouse living is awesome if you ever get the chance. Of course, it takes all of another hour for Lucky to come up banging on the door being like, that wasn't a good check. I said, I know it wasn't a good check. It was for stolen property. It doesn't have to be good. We're going to make this the last time we see each other, and that's going to be all. He accepted that, and he threatened to kill me, but never did, as you can see. And I finally got the car back. It was really no worse for wear. He'd scuffed the clear bra just a little bit. We replaced that panel. The car remained part of the rental fleet for a couple more years. And then eventually I went to work at Lamborghini Atlanta and sold them off. I found out that it was just easier to make money selling people cars than renting them by the day. But that's why my wedding day was the worst day of my life. Buying a used car, especially sight unseen, can be a very scary process, and you should never do that without getting the car inspected first. And the best and easiest way to have that done is using the Lemon Squad. They are an amazing resource that can almost immediately inspect a car for you anywhere in the country. They have no hidden fees, they're the largest company in the industry, and they have the fastest response times in the industry. So check them out now at the link in the description below. You can use the code VINwiki for a 10% discount. It is the best way not only to find out if you're being scammed, find out if the car is a piece of garbage, and to make sure that you're buying exactly the car that you're looking for. So next time you buy a car, make sure to use the Lemon Squad.